In the heart of London, Ontario, Canada, lies the Elgin-Middlesex Detention Centre, the EMDC, a 450-bed maximum security jail home to some of the most dangerous and violent offenders in the country. Although a rough 450 inmates are housed at the EMDC, the original design layout was for 150 people, meaning it's overpopulated and petty thieves are being locked up with hardened criminals. Some former prison officers have gone on record to state that personnel are afraid to go into work, but they have to collect a paycheck. The way the prison's laid out means that the guards have to come into close contact with multiple prisoners at once, and in fear of an attack, many say they do the bare minimum and allow the prisoners to run the show. The conditions at the EMDC are that bad. Thousands of inmates, at the behest of lawyer Kevin Egan, are suing the government for $325 million. Part of that lawsuit claims that prisoners were instructed by guards to follow rules set up by the inmates, or they risk being beaten without any help. Overcrowding, minimal medical care, violence, negligence by prison staff, and ultimately death are all key points that give the prison its nickname, the Devil's Playground. Since 2009, there have been 20 deaths at the prison, one as early as 2 months ago from when I'm recording this video, on November 16th, 2022. 44-year-old Jamie Briggs was said to have died from a stomach ulcer that ruptured, causing sepsis. Suicide, drug overdoses, and natural causes make up the majority of the deaths, so one must ask themselves, what exactly is going on, and why are a lot of these preventable incidents popping up year after year? If we could package the answer into one box, it would be the system as a whole. And although one party may play a bigger role than the other, they all lead to some inmates losing their lives. So the responsibility lies with everyone, including the Canadian government. As devastating as the deaths are at the jail, there is one that stands out. An incident that, believe it or not, took place on Halloween night in 2013. This wasn't a drug overdose, a suicide, or death by natural causes, rather a murder. 29-year-old Adam Kargus had aspirations of opening a tattoo shop one day, but after falling into a habit of drug taking, crystal meth to be more specific, he would find himself turning to a life of crime to feed his habit. Although Adam had a good head on his shoulders attempting to come off the drugs, he always found himself turning back to them, and that cycle continued for years. However, that was all due to change when he was sent to jail. You see, on October 17th, 2013, he'd been sentenced to 90 days in jail for identity fraud. By this point, he'd already spent a little time in jail on remand. Using a stolen ID, he purchased 5 phones and sold them on for a profit in order to feed his drug habit. It had been a success, but when the money ran out, he attempted to go back to that same shop to try again, but the owners had been alerted to the ongoing police investigation into the matter and assisted them. So Adam was tracked down, arrested, charged, and then jailed. He was originally sent to the Sarnia jail, but after falling victim to an attack, he begged to be moved. That move was allowed. Little did he know he'd be transferred to somewhere 10 times worse, and although he may have only been serving a 90-day sentence, that would have felt like years. When arriving at the EMDC, Adam was accepted by all the other inmates in Unit 6 left. Some say they looked at him as a younger brother, he would make everyone laugh. People generally left him alone after his beating at Sarnia was visible to see. With jail being a huge wake-up call for Adam, he decided it was finally time to get off the drugs for good and change his life around. To say that drugs were easy to get a hold of in the EMDC would be an understatement. But he was for real this time. He was ready to give it up, and according to reports, he didn't touch anything, not even the prison-made alcohol. With the future looking bright then, maybe, just maybe, that dream of owning a tattoo store one day would finally come to fruition. Sadly though, it wouldn't, and the crumbling of this dream would start on October 24th, 2013. Enters Anthony George. By October of 2013, Anthony was a regular face in the Canadian prison system, serving time in both Sarnia and the EMDC. Allegedly having ties to local gangs, the hot-headed thug was known for carrying weapons and ready to put his life on the line for the sake of the streets. He had a long criminal history to back that up. Alcohol played its part in him going on to commit said crimes. During his then stint in jail in 2013, he'd been locked up on an aggravated assault charge and was serving time in Sarnia California's segregation unit. But for whatever reason, he was transferred to the EMDC to serve out the remainder of his sentence. He was known in jail for being a bully, picking on the small guy to show people what would happen if they got on the wrong side of him. And sadly for Adam, he would be that victim. It isn't clear how the two were even allowed to be in the same unit together, let alone the same cell. Anthony a violent offender, Adam serving a short time for fraud, but they did. Maybe it was because of the overpopulation problem. According to a report that would come out, Anthony was supposed to be moved to the segregation unit in the EMDC after he transferred, but due to staff negligence, they threw him in Unit 6 left. A prison officer would later go on to falsify documents, stating that the reason Anthony wasn't moved was because the 15 segregation cells that they had were full. But as you know, that turned out to be false, and one cell had actually been left spare. Whether that was for Anthony or not is unclear. Over the course of the week leading up to October 31st, 2013, the violence against Adam started immediately. Anthony played this off as, quote, teasing. The guards brushed it off as, quote, horseplay, but in Adam's eyes, he was being picked on. And in fact, I'd even go as far as saying he was tortured for a whole week. According to phone calls made back home, Adam would tell stories of how he was having a really hard time since being paired with Anthony as a cellmate.
I'm waking up to Anthony on top of me. He's strangling me and putting me in a headlock until I go unconscious. I'm really scared of him. He keeps doing it to me throughout the day.
At around 6:20 PM on October 31st, 2013, Adam got on the phone to his mother. What they both didn't know, though, was that this would be the last time they spoke to each other.
Hey mama, we've been on lockdown. No one's been allowed to use anything. I wanted to phone you, tell you I love you. I'll be home real soon.
What he didn't tell her, though, was that only hours earlier, he'd been placed in a headlock that nearly rendered him unconscious. All of this had happened right in front of a guard. At around 3:45 PM, all Unit 6 left inmates were in the social area, having a chat with one another. Adam is spotted here, Anthony here. Reports say they shared mutual friends with each other from the streets. Just moments into the surveillance footage, Anthony walks up to Correctional Officer Tanya Zavitz and began to chat. Tanya was standing in the cage, a wire mesh doorway where officers can view the unit. During the conversation, he asked if she liked the jack-o'-lantern he drew on his t-shirt. In the spirit of the holiday, she told him there would be no treats, so he'd have to do a trick. This was the trick. Anthony would march over to Adam, put him in a chokehold, and started to drag him towards the cage. Adam repeatedly tapped on Anthony's arm to surrender, but he kept the hold in place until his knees got wobbly and his face turned pink. Officer Gregory Langford approached Anthony to tell him, quote, stop the horseplay stuff, and eventually he let go. After receiving nearly a week of abuse at the hands of Anthony, Adam had enough. He wanted to be moved to the vacant cell next door, and had even moved all of his possessions, but for reasons unknown, that night, he stayed put in the cell. At 7:07 PM, they would be locked in for the night, and that would be the last time Adam would leave his cell alive. To give some context leading up to the events we're about to go over, it should be noted that Anthony had made a batch of prison-made alcohol in his cell. Reporters say he had drank a, quote, toilet full. A black bag had literally been in the toilet. The inmates would go dip their cups in and drink. Earlier on in the day, he had also unknowingly smoked a tobacco roll-up that was laced with PCP, aka angel dust. Mix those two along with Anthony able to snap at any moment because of his anger issues, and you have a recipe for disaster. But he was in good spirits. He at one point, while locked in his cell, had offered an officer a drink, but of course he refused, and about 20 minutes after being locked in for the night, he was visited by a nurse, but she refused to leave medication because he appeared drunk. Not angry though. Roughly 2 minutes after the nurse left, Officer Greg Langford did the final rounds, checking in on the inmates before he clocked off his shift. He noticed the alcohol smell coming from Anthony and Adam's cell and wrote a note down on a whiteboard for the other members of staff to see. For whatever reason though, that information would seemingly be brushed off, which eventually marked Adam for death. At around 7:57 p.m, surveillance camera footage would show Anthony pushing Adam up against the cell wall and beginning to strike him. Adam falls back and holds his hands to his face as Anthony continues to strike again and again. Over a rough hour and 10-minute period, Adam was subjected to a brutal beatdown at the hands of his cellmate. It was that horrific that other inmates were pleading for someone to come and help. They never did. Roughly 20 minutes into the ordeal, Adam was made to clean his own blood off the walls and floor of the cell. Where were the guards though? Surely they would have heard the commotion. Well, that was true. Correctional Officer Leslie Lonsbury did hear all the commotion, but as he made his way to the unit, he heard cheering and concluded the inmates were watching sports on the common room TV. I'm unsure of the specific unit layout though, so I'm not sure if the TV is visible from all cells. At around 8:18 p.m, Leslie shut the door to the office for about half an hour and would later testify he was on the phone for about 17 minutes. I needed to dull the noise coming from Unit 6. At around 8:30 p.m, another officer, Dan Tyler, heard banging noises in Unit 2. This unit is directly below Unit 6. One of the prisoners had told him, quote, "It sounds like someone's getting killed up there." Dan Tyler began to investigate but was told by staff in Unit 4 that a plumbing problem was causing the issue. What about the cell checks then? Surely someone must have saw what was going on. Well, not exactly. You see, although policy requires tours of the units roughly every 30 minutes, it was rare that rounds were completed between 8 and 9 p.m, or during morning wake-up and clean-up periods. Sadly for Adam, this meant no one was there to help. The final blow took place at around 8:53 p.m. An autopsy report showed that Adam had suffered 34 injuries to the face and 122 across various parts of the body. The attack rendered him dead. 9 minutes after the final blow was given, the guards finally did the rounds. However, for some reason, it seems as if they didn't pick up on the horrific ordeal that emerged from Adam and Anthony's cell. Over the next few hours, inmates tried to quietly inform the correctional officers about what had happened. We'll assume they didn't want to look like an informant, so they tried to keep it quiet. One inmate shows some kind of sign here, but the guards pay no attention. With multiple checks being done overnight, but no guards seemingly paying attention, maybe for a brief second being heavily intoxicated, Anthony thought he got away with it. As the morning swung around, the cleanup began and the attempt to dispose of the body somehow started. However, less than an hour after placing his body into the shower block and cleaning up the cell, Adam's body was found. Anthony would later tell a reporter that he didn't even know how the incident occurred and that he doesn't even remember it happening. All he remembers is waking up in the morning, asking a friend for advice after noticing that Adam wasn't waking up. That friend told him to tell a guard but then backtracked and told him to put the body in the shower block. It's unclear whether an actual disposal of the body would have eventually took place, but that didn't matter because Adam's body was found, and Anthony was announced as the #1 suspect because of the surveillance camera footage. He would eventually go on to be charged in relation to the case, and it went to trial, but as it started, he agreed to the plea deal that was put forward to him. During the sentencing hearing, Adam's mother said that she forgave Anthony, and Anthony apologized to her, saying the incident should have never have happened. However, other family members didn't accept his apology. In that same interview I referenced just a moment ago, Anthony continued to stick to his story, by the way, and maintained his somewhat innocence. Although he eventually apologized to Adam's mother, during some earlier court hearings, it was alleged that he began to taunt her. So you have to ask yourself, does he actually feel remorseful, or was he just attempting to get the lowest sentence possible? He would go on to be sentenced to life with the minimum term of 10 years for second-degree murder. That wasn't the only court proceedings in regards to the incident though, because 2 officers, Stephen Jerkus and Leslie Lonsbury, who were on duty that night, had been charged because it was alleged that they failed to provide the necessaries of life to an inmate. They were both charged in 2014 over the incident, lost their jobs due to the ongoing criminal charges, and when the case was finally given the go-ahead, they attempted to have it dropped due to the length of time that had passed. However, that was refused and they both ended up going on trial. Stephen was found not guilty at the first trial, whilst the jury couldn't decide whether Leslie was guilty or not. So he went on a second trial where a decision once again couldn't be made, so the prosecution decided they weren't going to go ahead with a third trial. In other words, the charges were dropped against him. I'm still bemused at how such a low sentence was handed down to Anthony and how this was even looked at as a second-degree murder charge. Now, granted, do I think that he'll get out over the next few years? It's 2023 now, so 10 years has passed. But remember, he was serving another sentence. I don't know specifically how long he's got left until that 10-year minimum is up, but we'll say it's over the next couple of years. Probably not, but still the minimum term should have been much greater than it was. Anthony claims he never knew what he was doing during the ordeal, but in my opinion, I think he did. What I didn't tell you when I was explaining what was happening is that he was putting his thumb down and putting the other thumb across his neck, as if to say that he had killed him. So his actions over the course of that night literally prove he knew what he was doing, and then taunting Adam's mother in court just shows what kind of person he really is. I think he was apologetic during the sentencing just to be handed a smaller sentence. As for the EMDC, well, today conditions are still the same. People are dying and being treated similar to that of Adam. No one is helping. Until that place gets shut down or the government have a better grip on it, it will continue, and as much as it pains me to say it, I don't think it'll be much longer until we see a case like this again.